Hello. 5 years ago, Charity Crossing made a promise to a young father that Charity Crossing would do an autism walk every year to increase autism understanding and acceptance. CC have been very successful so far in its mission. Even during the pandemic years, CC successfully conducted the walk and fulfilled its promise. Any funds raised from these events are given back to the autistic communities. On April 23rd, 2022, Charity Crossing hosted its fifth annual Autism Understanding Acceptance Walk at Glasgow Park, Delaware, and Wilson Farm Park, Pennsylvania. Both events were free to participate in order to encourage community participation. Every year, CC strives to make an impact. To that end, this year events were led by the compassionate youth leaders. These youth leaders are not only learning about autistic community but also coming up with great ideas to support the autistic communities. Delaware event was kicked off. Over 225 people participated in the walk. Delaware team welcomed dignitaries, special guests, sponsors, and walk participants. The event was attended by Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, Delaware Senator Nicole Poore, Delaware Senator Stephanie Hansen, Newcastle County Councilman David Tackett, Officer Colin Kearns, and fellow Newcastle County Police Department colleagues. Dr. Chitra Vaidi and fellow Numos colleagues. Blood Bank of Delaware were represented Tony Prado. Our sponsors, New York Life. Delaware team also held a community giveaway event on that day, which benefited 100 families. Charity Crossing will be donating $2,000 toward installing and upgrading Autism Playground in Glasgow Park, Delaware. The Pennsylvania event team had an amazing event. Around 80 people participated in the walk. Kids had fun meeting and taking pictures with the Miss Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania team welcomed the dignitaries, sponsors, special guests, walk participants. Pennsylvania Representative Melissa Schutterman, Michael Hartman, Chief of Staff representing PA Senator, Miss Pennsylvania Megan, Mrs. Nita Tippins, occupational therapist, and Newark Life insurance representative were present in addition to the walk participants. Charity Crossing will be donating $1,017 to North Penn School District. This fund will be used to buy equipment needed for special needs school program. Great teamwork was on display at these events. Charity Crossing thanks event organizers, volunteers, sponsors, and dignitaries for their support for these successful Autism Walk events. Thank you, and watch some videos.
Oh, we got a walk. Oh, I'm stalling for everyone. Okay, a little lean, a big stretch. I love it. Wonderful, wonderful. To the sky. Thank you, Mother Nature, for not raining. All the way down. All right. All right, we almost have everyone. I needed that. Woo!
I used to run that 5K. He's on the
You?
That's the reason we're all here is because of his coach. The guy that was
Wonderful.
Hey, Zoe.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi. 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 Hello. Hi. Great walk. Hi. And yay!
Wave. Wave. Wave.
Month resolution is no longer a senator. We would like you to introduce this. And Senator Kaminis came to me and said, Razzle Dazzle, that's my nickname. We need to do this. What can we do? So step one, we were really excited to have the honor to officially name Autism Acceptance Month by the Pennsylvania Senate and across the Commonwealth. We kicked off the month for the first 3 days of April, lighting up the Capitol in collaboration with the Lieutenant Governor in rainbow colors for autism. And last week we had the opportunity to highlight the Dub C Autism Center at Westchester University. And what an incredible program. We got to bring the Secretary of Labor and Industry, the Secretary of Human Services, and got to highlight a really neat program. So anyone that has an interest in this world, I would encourage you to look at the Dub C Autism program. But they asked all the student participants a really powerful question. What's the difference between acceptance and awareness? And the students with autism, I think fueled energy for me to tackle the world well beyond Autism Acceptance Month. They just simply described the difference to them is you may be aware of your neighbor, you may be aware of a restaurant, you may be aware of a style of music, but when you go and actually talk to your neighbor and get to know them and accept them, it's totally different than acceptance and awareness. You might try a restaurant, maybe it's not your style of food, but you accepted it by trying it, and so on, so on. So the idea that we can come together and get to know each other and embrace differences is a really powerful thing. So I thank the autism community for providing inspiration in this time that the world needs to come together a lot more than, and we're so divided. So can I have Shreya, Tia, and Glenn come up? Because I have a special resolution here. I won't read the whole thing because it gets really confusing and there's whereases and resolved by and all these crazy words. But on behalf of the Pennsylvania State Senate, come on up here, Tia. Senator Kamina is thrilled that her colleagues joined her to recognize the month of April 2022 as Autism Acceptance Month in Pennsylvania. And I really like this one line, working with and working for individuals living with autism spectrum disorders and helping them reach their greatest potential through accurate early diagnosis, education, intervention, and acceptance. Resolved that the Senate recognize the month of April 2022 as Autism Acceptance Month in Pennsylvania and urge this observance throughout the Commonwealth for the benefit of all individuals living with autism spectrum disorders and their families. So happy Autism Acceptance Month, Pennsylvania.
Them, I've gotten to know some tips for working with people with autism. So first and foremost, try not to make too much eye contact with them because, I mean, as we know, autism affects communication, and therefore, if you make eye contact with them, they may take that wrongly. Even if you meant nothing like aggressive against them, they may not accept it and they might even be aggressive. Second, be very literal with people with autism, especially with those who can communicate, because even if they can communicate, they still have problems with understanding figurative language, like exaggerating things. So don't use like idioms or anything that people with autism will take too literally. Be very direct with them. Third, I kind of forget my third point. Okay, we'll move on to the fourth. Fourth one is respecting them. You have to respect people with autism because, I mean, at the end of the day, they're still people, and if you don't respect them enough, they may take that as if it's some sort of attack, and they may respond accordingly. So, yeah. The third point I want to say is, can I check? Okay. Wait.
Thank you, Shreya, for the very welcome. And thank you, Charity Crossing, for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge and share some information on autism awareness. So before I go further, I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about, the ASD, which is the acronym given for Autism Spectrum Disorder. So according to the CDC, the definition for the autism spectrum disorder is it's not a disease, it's actually a condition. It is a developmental disability that affects children with three main things. First is the communication. The communication can be, they have impaired communication with their verbal skills and their non-verbal skills. They have difficulty with social interaction, how they communicate, how they interact with people. And the third most important is they have their behaviors. So the reason why it's called a spectrum, it's really an umbrella of these conditions. So the severity and the range of these conditions vary from a person to person. No two children with the spectrum are going to look the same. So there's a very variety or a very different severity in their conditions, because of which that's why it's called a spectrum. Under the spectrum, there are three main conditions. One is the autistic disorders. Second is the pervasive developmental disorders. And the third is the Asperger's syndrome. So under the ASD, the autism spectrum disorder, you have these three main categories. The data says that 1 in 54 children are identified with autism. That's a big number. Boys are 4 times have a higher chance of getting it than girls. This starts early. Sometimes these kids are identified with disorders as early as 2 years of old. These kids sometimes are, they're missing their milestones. They have a significant delay in their milestones. Now, how do we know what are the symptoms? How do I know that my child has a symptom? You can identify these symptoms as early as 2 years of age. The first most important symptom, there are several symptoms. The first important symptom is they're not responding to their names. You call a child when they're little and they're not responding to their names. These are all red flags. They're avoiding your eye contact. They're not looking at you. They're not able to show you the emotion of happiness or sadness. They're not interested in, games. They're not interested in playing. They're not able to communicate their needs, whether it be verbally, through gestures, or through pointing. These kids have a lot of challenges. Some of them have sensory issues. So what are sensory issues? Sensory issues are issues that mean their brains are not able to process the sensory information like you and I see, hear, touch, feel. They're not able to respond to that correctly, because of which They are hypersensitive to certain sounds, certain noises, certain lights, certain textures. They can have an aversion, meaning they don't want to touch or eat or feel certain kinds of textures. They may have, because of these sensory issues, they may have a lot of medical issues, stomach issues, allergies, constipation, difficulty with digestive system. So it interferes with them medically too. Not only do they have all these symptoms, other symptoms could include these children have a very hard time with transitioning from one activity to another. A little routine change will be very upsetting for them. Imagine having all these symptoms. It's very challenging for these kids. Now again, you can have these symptoms in one, all, or none of them. So it varies. So we have to make sure when you talk to your doctor, you explain to them that your child may have one of these symptoms, or the doctor might even ask you some questions, and based on that they can figure out whether the child really has a diagnosis of autism. Now, what is the impact that if your child has the diagnosis, how does this get impacted? It gets impacted in three main categories. The first main category is the learning. Because these children have such a hard time with attention, focusing, learning is going to be very hard for them. This is going to affect them to access the education curriculum. They are going to have difficulty with social interactions. For these children, it's very hard to communicate or to understand the social, the non-social, non-verbal cues, as a result of which it's hard for them to have meaningful relationship with people. They're not able to interact with people like you and I do. They have a hard time making friends. They have a hard time building relationship. Friends to them can be overwhelming and challenging. So social interaction is very, very hard for these kids. The third most important is the gross motor and fine motor skills. These kids have missed a lot of milestones. If you miss milestones, you sometimes don't develop good muscular strength, muscular skills. They don't have enough core strength or the muscle strength in their legs, in their arms. A lot of kids you see are walking on their toes. If you don't have the strength, it affects you to perform certain skills like ball catching, riding a bike, participating in any sports activities. So the gross motor and the fine motor skills will affect their ability to perform day-to-day activities. Now, what's the treatment? We know the symptoms. We know how there is going to affect them. The first and most important is early intervention. That's the key. Just like in any condition, if you know exactly what has happened early enough, you can provide the intervention and get better results. The earlier detection will give you best results. Now, autism, unfortunately, is not something that goes away. You have to live with those symptoms. You have to learn to manage those symptoms. So the approach or the treatment for autism is based on the condition. As I said, in the beginning, that there is a variety or a very different kinds of symptoms. So based on those symptoms, the approaches is provided. So the first most important approach is the behavior approach. These are kids who have a very hard time with their behaviors. So the behavior approach is the most evidence-based practice that is widely used. It's something called as the ABA or the VB mapping that is widely accepted and widely used in our area. The second is the developmental approach. the developmental approach is really designed